looking at where are the greatest opportunities from the perspective of investors, where people who are putting their money where their mouth is. And Esther, you've been doing that for quite some time, and you have a lot of experience. You've sold invested companies to Apple and other leaders, big companies in Silicon Valley and beyond. Can you give us your investment thesis when you look at AI? And again, given that AI itself means different things or means everything and nothing at once, how do you think about it from a practical investment perspective?
Yeah, so I would say, back to earlier panels, AI is not just being democratized, it's being commodified. And so in the end, the value is not just in your scientists, though that's important. It's also in your data sets and, frankly, in your management. Investors sometimes forget you're investing in the implementation of the idea, not just the idea.
And over time, the value might migrate to that rather than, as you say, the commoditized code, as it were.
It already is. I mean, there are so many chatbot companies.
Right.
And as I mentioned, I'm lucky I've sold 2 of those already to some of the companies mentioned.
I have a frightening thought. Can an AI MBA be far behind? Probably not. People are working on it, I'm sure.
It's a while. I mean, yeah. So from an investor point of view, you really want to solve useful problems rather than have the leading scientist.
Right.
Leading scientists, anyway, they go to Google and Apple very quietly, and to Amazon and places like that. Your job as an investor, and especially I'm an early stage angel investor, is, we're all looking for the one that will become the unicorn, but in reality, we are more likely to get the one that gets sold to Facebook or Uber or whatever. And there it's having focus and a clean definition of the problem, because that's what makes money. It's implementing, not inventing, not innovating, actually.
Give us a couple of examples of invested companies that you are particularly proud of having gotten into.
Yeah. So one is a company called Turbine.ai. It's based in Hungary. So this is not your kind of standard model. It's go find the ones that are really interesting. There's an awful lot of drug discovery being done statistically, and there's a huge amount of these recognition problems looking for different kinds of cancers and all kinds of stuff. They actually model the behavior of the molecules and how the different parts fit into each other and how proteins fold and stuff like that. And so right now they're looking mostly at existing drugs for different uses, or drugs that failed a drug trial when being used against some kind of cancer but might actually be interesting.
They want to repurpose them.
Yeah.
To something other than the original intent.
Obviously, if it's toxic, forget it. But if it just didn't seem to be useful for this, maybe it would be useful for that.
Right.
Because you understand the kinds of molecules it interacts with.
Right.
They're working with a couple of pharma companies, and it's really promising. Another one it's called Boundless, and they are sort of on the opposite spectrum of understanding human behavior, and by understanding it, you can provide the right stimuli to predict it, make it happen. And really, I'm interested in that one because I want to make sure it's used for good, because there's so much of this manipulative technology being used basically for advertising or possibly political control.
Right.
And there, as an investor, I'm very concerned about who the other investors are.
So what's an example of a good application you want to see the company get into?
Helping you resist temptation, whether it's alcohol or food or staying up late or losing your temper in a line at the airport.
Gosh, it sounds great. We should all take some of this. When do we get to buy this product?
It's an SDK for other companies to use in their apps.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, but behavioral change is often the hardest thing, right? So
it is.
Good luck with that.
And you need that reminder at exactly the right time. It's having the angel on your shoulder instead of the devil.
Yeah. And of course, just to stick with that for a moment, I imagine, because people vary in their personalities, what works for you won't work for me. I may resist a certain, angel on my shoulder, so you may need to find a more nuanced approach. And I imagine the AI would be smart enough to figure this out over time.
Right, and I call it precision motivation rather than precision medicine.
Right. Interesting. Okay. That's great. Let me jump to Soma. You have an investment philosophy about AI, moving up, moving down, moving out. Can you tell us what this means and how we can profit from it?
Sure. So if you go back, like, say, 5 years ago, there's a lot of excitement about, like, hey, wanting to build ML tools, machine learning tools, or AI tools, or build some frameworks, build some core building blocks.
Sure.
That, like, I think the world has waken up to, like, all the big platform guys have been doing this now for several years. I think at the core of AI and machine learning, I think all the building blocks that you need are sort of, in place, and it's only getting better every day that goes by. So as we think about what is going to be exciting in the next 5 to 10 years, we sort of think about this, like, hey, moving up, moving down, and moving out. So let me explain what I mean by that. We are more interested now in thinking about, like, hey, how can we move up the stack and think about application of AI into different vertical industries or use cases. Just to give you one example, right? Pretty much every company in the world deals with customer data and customer support. Okay, it's tons of data, and, like, always, like, hey, you got to think about, like, unhappy customers and what are you doing about them, kind of thing. With all the data, is there a way we can apply AI and say, hey, we can sort of, get to a point where there is more automatic, resolution of issues, or at least, I can deflect automatically based on the knowledge base that I have, or I can at least, in the worst case, like, auto route your customer support query to the absolutely best possible customer support agent, so that in the whole process, you increase the customer satisfaction significantly and lower the cost of supporting your existing customers, right? That's a classic example of a vertical use case scenario in enterprises that AI can be applied to in some meaningful ways, right? So how do you, and your question earlier about, like, hey, is it healthcare, is it automotive, is it this, is it that, right? I think there's just tremendous amount of applications of AI that I think is going to happen, and that's what we mean when we say moving up. When I talk about moving down, it's really like, hey, if you look at the hardware evolution, starting from CPUs to GPUs to FPGAs to ASICs and, purpose-built hardware, there's a ton of work that's happening to think about, like, hey, how can I reduce the cost of, doing all this sort of, data crunching, data work, or, like, how can I conserve battery so that I don't keep consuming lots of battery, kind of thing, right? Part of the problem is most of the work that has happened so far in machine learning and AI assumes that, hardware is going to be always on, always connected, and massive amounts of computational power, that's possible. As it relates to moving out, we think more and more people are going to move more from the data center to think about what kinds of intelligence operations can happen at the edge of networks, right? Could be a camera, could be a cell phone, could be some other sensor. And these are all resource-constrained devices where you need to think about how you can run machine learning or AI models.
So you're talking about the Internet of Things.
Yeah, Internet of Things. That's one way to think about it, kind of thing, right?
But isn't the challenge there that really to have nearly ubiquitous sensors, and you're going to have to need very low power, low cost.
Low power.
There's some real constraints on what you can put on the edge.
It's low power, low cost, and very sparsely connected, not always connected.
Right.
So you'll have to have enough processing capability to be able to run inference models and do the detection on the device, as opposed to having to round trip back and forth to the cloud. Right?
But that sounds like a difficult problem. Mm-hmm. Do you have some companies that are working on this?
Absolutely right. One of our companies that we've invested in is a company called xnor.ai. And they are thinking about, like, hey, what can I do from a software perspective to be able to help you build and run algorithms and machine learning models on the edge in a resource optimized way, so that you don't round trip, right? So that's, like, it's spun out of AI2 in Seattle. AI2 is Paul Allen's Institute of Artificial Intelligence, and sort of we've been working with them and spun out the company, and it's now up and running, and they've got some very exciting early customers.
Okay, so we got 2 out of 3. You want to quickly tell us the third moving?
No, I talked, moving down was the hardware.
Moving up, moving down, moving out is the edge. There we go, we got them all. All right, now I'm moving on to our final panelist. Jacob, you're particularly invested in cameras, computer vision technologies. You think that's really where the heart of the action is. Can you tell us why you're so excited? And maybe give us, we're all familiar with this now, but tell us what's the pathway forward, because there's various ways of thinking about the applications of the technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And people often ask, so what is AI? And the answer is everything is AI. Like every company that we see come through our doors is using AI, and they at least claim to be using AI, and that's a simple process of.
But the people who aren't using AI aren't coming through your doors. Surely there's a selection bias.
I don't know. But it's just an evolution of technology. It's like saying, what is mobile? Well, everything is mobile. We all know mobile. But 10 years ago, that would have been this panel. What is mobile? So like that, AI is just an evolution of technology. As I think about it, I think about how do we, to Esther's point, how do we sell solutions? How do companies sell solutions that can be purchased today, that a company can implement today? And so we could talk about software applications. We could talk about robotic applications. My specific love is that of the camera and computer vision. My perspective is that all of us are very familiar with a camera. We all use a camera today. We use it to navigate this room. We used it to navigate to Chicago. That camera is our eyeball. It's our input device, and it's connected to a massive supercomputer that lives in the head. And it means we're able to compute complex decisions every second of every day to accomplish certain goals. Drinking coffee, waking up in the morning, getting food, taking a shower, et cetera. The point that we're reaching now is that camera sensors are inexpensive enough, and to Soma's point, can handle a lot of computation. The ability to compute on the edge or in a central data sensor is at a high enough fidelity, and the connectivity to be able to connect to a supercomputer, so wireless, is there. So what that means is that using a camera and the right components, you're able to compute a lot of the very, very complex tasks that we as humans do with our eyeballs. So to me, the camera is just a data sensor. And I'm focused on the applications that can be built on top of that, the software applications that can be built on top of that. That ranges from health, from being able to image the color of your blood vessels and understand how healthy you are, to changing farming. So there's actually robots that are going through fields that are looking for certain colors of strawberries and identifying the ripe ones and picking just those ones. Because strawberries are actually one of the only crops in America that grow year-round, and they don't ripen at the same time. So it's a constant threshing process. Right. It can be used for autonomous vehicles. Those of you in the room who have a Tesla, that Tesla navigates with 8 optical cameras, only cameras. It has a radar for
Elon Musk doesn't believe in LiDAR, does he?
It's too expensive. And actually, that's a really interesting point, right? We could talk about AI all day long and talk about the best of AI, but most of the time it's too expensive and it's too onerous to be used in application. And Elon Musk has said, no, we're going to use cameras, and that's how we're going to do it. And so that's my perspective, which is an application of AI, specifically to how we live better lives and live more effectively in the workplace.
What's going to be, you think, the most lucrative application of the technologies you're investing in? Which is going to be your unicorn?
It's a great question, and I'm building out a whole map of like all the vertical industries and parts of the stack, and it's so broad. I think from my perspective, there's a great opportunity for entrepreneurs right now to be building across the technology spectrum. I look at it, I mean, certainly we're all, autonomous vehicles are here, for better or worse. That is one of the largest industries where people are spending a lot of money. We just actually announced an investment in a company called Starsky Robotics, which is actually a robotic truck. It's a trucking company that pulls long-haul freight across the country. And the other panelist on the other was mentioning this industry. There's a huge need for trucking, and it's actually a job that not a lot of people like to do because it's long hours and it's a tough job. And so if you can automate those long-haul pieces, it actually means that with the growth of Amazon and the growth of e-commerce, the more buying we buy, there's more demand for that need. And so what does that mean? It means products get to us faster. It means they get to us cheaper. So autonomy right now is massive. The other one, just to stick a nail in the ground, is I'd say agriculture or construction.
Right. So you're going to put construction workers out of work, strawberry pickers, truckers. Who else do you have in your sights?
No,
you're going to be a very popular man.
Yeah, it's not putting people out of work. It's enabling people to do jobs that are more intellectually stimulating that the computers can't do yet.
I think we'll hear a little bit more about that on one of our next panels, where we're going to talk about more jobs of the future, including with a panelist from Walmart who will discuss some of that. Esther, I want to ask you, you've mentioned your investment in Hungary. I also know you're invested in Yandex, which is arguably the only real competition Google has in search space. Can you give us your perspective on the hotspots for promising AI startups and companies? Leaving behind Silicon Valley, where in the world are the places that you really think are going to be contenders?
I don't really look at it geographically.
Okay.
But wherever smart people emerge, then the real challenge is if you're kind of a social, technical consumer company, you're best off being where the customers are.
Closer to the market, right.
If you're a scientific company, like for example Yandex, you can be pretty much anywhere. And so there you look for universities that kind of collect smart people and so forth. In terms of industries, I think healthcare actually is huge. I mean, what's the most interesting thing in the world? It's not products and machines, it's actually people.
Sure.
And the functioning of people is what's going to make us either a mess or a paradise. And what's changing is we're beginning to understand that the real challenges are more around behavior and neuroscience. It's not just recognizing cancers, but controlling the behaviors that led, I'm not blaming people for their diseases, but the behavior that made people more vulnerable to
Sure.
everything from diabetes and cancer and all this kind of stuff. Another company I have is called Syllable. Right now they're focusing on things as mundane as reminding people of appointments, but doing it in an intelligent way so you can understand whether the person's trying to cancel or simply would rather reschedule. I ran into an unintelligent bot the other day that wouldn't let me reschedule. You could either cancel or, yeah. So it's building an understanding of the context into your AI so that it interacts with the human in a way that the human understands. And we're still doing that effectively is still a long way away.
There's a lot of room to grow to understand human behavior, right? But the good news is, humans have an endless capacity for narcissism. So anything that comes our way to help us understand ourselves, we probably have a market for. Let me ask, perhaps, Jacob. Jacob, I think, given the dominance of big tech in AI, what role do you see for startups in this space? And sort of what's the tension between the two? How robust is the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think startups are agile. Startups have the crazy ideas that can then fuse a lot of the pieces that already exist together. And so thanks to large companies like Microsoft and Google and Facebook pushing forward and open standards, pushing forward products, Amazon, of course, that we can all buy as data services, we're getting the building blocks that previously were only available to highly funded companies. And so now anybody can actually tap into something like Google's TensorFlow and run massive computational processes at very low expense. So the opportunity for startups is taking these building blocks, being able to move very quickly and create new innovative ideas. And that continues to be the case, and that's the most exciting part.
I mean, what you've just said could have been transposed onto a discussion of startups in any technology field,
Yeah,
right? We could have said
fair
that any internet space.
Yeah.
Can you help us, since you're deep in it, you're a Kaufman Fellow, I think, and you're involved with VR Tuesdays or something. You're actually really hands-on in the ecosystem that supports startups.
Yep.
What's different about AI startups from other kinds of startups?
Yeah, so you're referring to a lot of the community building that I'm
Exactly.
doing. So we hold a number of community meetups out of our office in San Francisco for virtual reality and for augmented reality. I mean, what's unique is it's at the base level, it's the people and the people's insight into what is actually new. I mean, I don't know how the AI world is different than the panel we would have had 10 years ago, which is for the mobile world. To me, there are different implementations of new mediums of technology. And the tricky part is how do you implement that correctly? AI means you can implement very complex, highly resource-intensive processes cheaper and faster than ever before. So that's why we're seeing advances in robotics, in healthcare like we've never seen. And it's the people that are seeing those opportunities. And when I'm in the trenches with holding these meetups and meeting all the people on the front lines, they're thinking crazy thoughts out there and great ideas that need to be solved that oftentimes at a corporation you don't think about because you're thinking more about shipping timelines. And in a startup, you have the opportunity to move more quickly.
Right. I think a lot of us are from corporations who understand that feeling, are happy to be escaping that
I used to
grind
be.
for a day, right? At least to be with us, to think big thoughts, think out of the usual routines. I want to let you know I'm going to come to you for questions in just a moment, so please gather up some good questions for our panelists. Esther, I wanted to come to you with a trope that's made its way even onto the cover of The Economist, the idea that data is the new oil. What do you think about that analogy, and does it work for you, or do you think there's something wrong with it?
It works because data is out there, it's tremendously valuable, but in order for that value to be realized, it needs to be refined, shipped somewhere, stored, priced, allocated, and data is very much the same. I mean, it's everywhere. If you put sensors, I'm wearing 3, this is kind of a cool Internet of Things thing here. It's not just a ring.
What does it measure? Just a GPS or something else?
No, it's skin temperature, heartbeat, and it's a model of this. So at night, it collects my heartbeat in real time and is extremely power intensive. And last night, I forgot to charge it, so I don't know how well I slept last night. But the point is, collecting the data is one thing, then refining it, in this case, analyzing it and extracting deep sleep, REM sleep, being awake, and then putting it on my iPhone in a way that is visible. There's all that value added to the collection of data, and each part of it's important. This ring took a couple of years to engineer, and now the next model's coming out.
Right.
So oil, it's the raw material, but all the stuff you do to it to create the value, that's really important. And to some extent, it's becoming more commodified, just as oil refining processes are. I think the analogy is wonderful because it's extremely complex in that whether it's oil or data,
Right.
getting it actually to the point of providing value to somebody is a complicated process with both these brilliant little startups and these large data collectors.
Your point is well taken. The value comes from the aggregation and the analysis, and then some sort of insight that's presented from it. We can look at a petrochemical factory or something giving us useful plastics. But I would argue that there are some differences that are also worth reflecting on. One is that obviously hydrocarbons are concentrated in a few places in the
Yes,
world,
and they
where they
run
are,
out.
and they run out, right? There are only so many crunched up bones of dinosaurs under the soil, whereas data is both democratized in the sense that we all generate it, and secondly, it's infinite, and we'll continually generate more. And so we are willingly giving away something that has potential value, and it is being collected by others who are clever enough to figure out how to monetize it. At some point, people might figure that out, that what I'm getting in return isn't worth what I'm giving away. So there's a risk, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing I wanted to point out is my data is much more valuable than some Russian person living in a village, because at least in theory, I buy more. And so my patterns of behavior are more interesting to someone who wants to sell things.
Right.
The actual finding me and promoting stuff to me that I might buy is more interesting. So there's a de-democratization of data to the extent it's used in advertising or looking at consumer behavior patterns. It's really well known to any advertiser, an American audience. Sure. So that's one important thing. The other is the reality of, should I now start charging for my data? Which, I share that notion that it should be like that. The reality is, the richer you are as an individual, the more valuable your data is, but the less interesting that amount of money is to you. You buying the Porsche is really, really interesting to the Porsche company.
Right.
The $200 you might get for selling your data to the Porsche company, if you're in the market for a Porsche, probably isn't that interesting. So data reflects.
There's an asymmetry, clearly.
Yeah, and it reflects the real world in a really interesting way.
Yeah.
But the other thing about data is if I sell it to you, I still have it.
Right.
And if I sell you my oil, I don't.
Right. A great point.
Ken Miller, Elevate Ventures, investments in the state of Indiana for economic development. So my question is around the data topic, but more a question of democratization or the fact that the data that's available, so use HIPAA laws and our kind of walls that we're putting up, whereas the research and AI benefits to us as a global society are different from those of our individual interests in protection of information. So how or where do you see venture capital going, kind of breaking through this individual versus collective?
Did you want to
conflict?
focus specifically on healthcare with HIPAA or more broadly?
I think that's the easiest
Or the hardest, so to
discussion.
speak. It's the most interesting case. Any comments from our panelists? I know you're very much invested in health.
Yeah, I'm on the board of 23andMe and so forth. Fundamentally, if you ask people, we'd like to use your data for medical research, they're usually pretty happy to give it to you, especially somebody who's dying from some disease. They want to feel useful. They would love to give you their data. There's a company I'm an investor in called Patients Like Me that is based on that principle. The challenge is more with much broader category of data. People are suspicious it's going to be used against them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'll be brief and therefore not very satisfying in my answer. You know, it's something that will change over time as people feel more comfortable. And then the next question is, again, we know a lot more than what we actually make use of in the first place. You know, like, again, chronic diseases, we know what causes them, we aren't doing anything about it. And so the challenge is more the motivation side than the actual medical side.
You see, if we broaden the question beyond just healthcare, you know, Europe is introducing tough protections on data, obviously. In the US, we've yet to see the final backlash, but the fallout from the Facebook saga, where I think many people will rightly feel that they trusted a company and perhaps their data was not used in the way that they were promised. Where do you see this impacting the companies you're investing in, and the question the gentleman asked?
I think it's a combination of things, and Esther pointed out a couple of good things here. I think, you know, respecting people's privacy and understanding what is private and what is public, and then taking on the responsibility of ensuring that what is private stays private and what is public stays public, and what data can be anonymized that is going to be useful for the greatest goodness of the world. Where do you get permission from people before you use the data? Because people by default, when you ask them, are more open to sharing as opposed to otherwise kind of thing, right? But so these are things that you want to keep in mind, but know that at the end of the day, the responsibility lies with you, the company or the entity or the organization, to do the right things. And it's one of those things where the more trust you can gain, the more people will open up. It's one of those virtuous cycles that you want to be able to build. And like this week, like, you know, actually there are, what should I say, two sort of, you know, bad things that have happened, right? One is the data scandal that Facebook is going through. The other one is, like, you know, the autonomous vehicle that sort of, you know, caused a fatality, right? Both relate to data and massive amounts of data that have been used to create models or to do whatever they've been doing. And there is something that have gone wrong somewhere. And so organizations and companies need to really step up and take that responsibility and know that, like, you know, hey, private is private, public is public, and you have to respect the boundary and try to get the best out of what you have. But like also Esther says, there is tons of data that's already available. We can do a much better job of sort of, you know, using the data even before thinking about, like, hey, what more data we can get, kind of thing.
And then you just have to mention China also in this context, where the government is collecting huge amounts of data.
Yeah.
And it's going to be using it to make all kinds of decisions around access to all kinds of freedoms.
Where even Apple, which has been a company that's taken a different position on privacy than the other big giants, has just decided recently to move its servers and the data on Chinese users of Apple products to be following Chinese guidelines and laws. So, you know, you can't go up against the Chinese government if you want to do business in China. So they have a different vision for where they're going with this. And having lived 5 years in China, I saw firsthand cultural norms also play a role. Just as in Europe, for example, you said instinctively people will share. In Europe, instinctively people probably won't share. Their general bias, having lived through regimes of recent memory that invaded their privacy is not to give data away, which is reflected in their movement to and regulation. So I think we're going to see, you can call it a kind of competition. Yeah, different forms of evolution will happen in these markets, and we'll see which is most conducive to innovation.
Can I take a slight slice at that from a different way?
Yeah.
So, my vision is that cameras are going to change our worlds, and we're just going to live this.
You're like a one-trick pony there, right?
Right?
Cameras for everything. Yeah.
Well, it is. So think about it. In this room, there's probably 2 to 3 times the amount of cameras as there are people in the room right now. Mm-hmm. If you're carrying a cell phone, if you have a computer, that's 2, and then there's a photographer right here, and there's cameras up in the ceiling. So there's probably 2 or 3 times the amount of cameras in this room. So especially when you start thinking about China, people start talking about Big Brother, right? And so I think the number of cameras that are just going to continue proliferating. We have them on our cars, we have them everywhere, in our mirrors. And so the trick here is to make sure that this isn't Big Brother, but that this is, we protect the data. We don't send through video feeds and camera feeds and photographic feeds. We actually use it as a data sensor and use some edge compute to be able to identify what are the actions happening that are coming in through that data sensor and really firewall that out so you only send through the significant features, the classifiers of what you're trying to accomplish. Because I see this world with cameras everywhere as our near nirvana, but we need to make sure that we're all comfortable with that. Right? We need to make sure that we're not being spied on. And that's the responsibility of companies building, of the startups building. I think the regulators will follow way after the companies push it forward.
Or that if we are being spied on, there's some record so that unlike what you saw over there, you don't have my body being morphed to do something I never did or to say things I didn't say.
True.
And I think we have a historical example, CCTV cameras. Long before the US adopted them widely, Britain became the first surveillance state in a way, in very early adoption and use by police and other authorities. And there were a lot of test cases and legal battles. But we saw, I think, broadly speaking, the cultural norms of privacy and liberal values were upheld, even as the use of cameras became more extensive. And obviously that was in a dumb age without the AI that we have today. I think we can expect, again, based on cultural norms and legal systems and willingness of people to fight for their privacy, different outcomes in different places, at least is what I would predict.
Bill Sproul from Tech Titans in Dallas.
Welcome.
So the panel, what are you seeing in terms of valuations, returns, time to exit in your AI investments, and how does that compare to other sectors with which you're familiar?
Tough question, yes. Is it just a money pit, folks?
Sure.
Come on.
I would say, as I had mentioned before, right? 5 years ago when we were sort of, starting to invest in what I call the brick and mortar of AI, right? The platform, the tools. Now, how do you sort of, help developers create models and sort of train models, and how do you get access to data and clean the data so that you can get the right level of analytics and insights kind of thing? Those things, I think we've seen great exits, I would say. And most of them have been exits, at least from our perspective, that have been sort of, M&A exit by some of the bigger platform people, right? We've sold companies to Apple. We've sold companies to Snap, right? We've sold companies to Microsoft, right? And so all these bigger platform guys or companies, as they think about hey, ML is a core platform or a core capability that every cloud provider wants to give, and they look at all these startups that have done some groundbreaking work in the building blocks and say hey, I want those building blocks to be part of my platform, right? So I think from that perspective, I think we've seen some excellent exits. I would say very good exits kind of thing related to what.
Why haven't we seen a pure play AI company become a Google, as it were, or a Facebook, go public, stand on its own?
Because Google buys them first.
Yeah, they
No, hold on, though. You can turn down the money, right? There are examples of founders who turn down the money and have a vision to grow their company. Why is it we're not seeing that? Is it because it's your view, as the people backing these companies, that wouldn't work, that business model doesn't work, or some other reason? Are you too greedy and short-termist? That could be too.
I intuitively believe that the more value is going to be when you take AI as a sort of a means to an end and apply it to a particular use case or a particular scenario, right? I talked about customer support. I can sort of go on and on about areas where there is a potential for large standalone companies to exist and not get bought out kind of thing. But when you're building platform technologies or tools, the natural tendency, particularly if like every big platform company wants to do something in that space, they want to sort of go acquire. Look at like, the number of acquisitions that have happened in AI in the last 5 years, and you can sort of go through like, the big companies, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon kind of thing. It's just phenomenal how many acquisitions have happened.
Startups need to be building applied solutions for it to be able to build it out into very specific areas. And from a valuation perspective, we tend to invest in more end-user technology, not component technology. And what's really driving valuations, both in public markets and in private markets, is momentum. So not only are you doing 10 million a year, but how is that growing? Is that doubling this year? Is that tripling this year? Is that tripled last year and tripled this year? And there's different growth curves, but valuations for companies that do have momentum are up.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, the ones I've sold, I would say they were all sold too early in some way. Yandex is a multi-billion-dollar company that's basically AI-based. Another one I've got is Prognos, which is also in the medical area. But these companies mostly won't be called AI companies. They'll be called medical companies or consumer companies or something. But I don't think having AI inside is any guarantee, again.
Because everyone will have it.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, couldn't we call Uber an AI company?
It is.
It is.
Right? And that's like the largest private market company
Right,
today.
right. But that's a good counterexample.